Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending one of your weekend days with us to chat about one of my favorite I don't really know what to describe it. Like the middle parts of the Venn diagram, like music and magic. So we're here to talk about musical and magical worlds, or musical magical worlds. I couldn't figure out if I should do the and or whatever. But I'm so happy to chat all about fantasy and magic and music. So just a little bit about me before we chat with the authors. I'm the moderator for this panel, and I'm kind of the internet in all sorts of like different sort of constellations of utopia state of mind. And also before, oh, I don't know if anyone can still hear me because I can't see myself. But before we start, I also wanted to mention that here we talk like we're trying to foster a safe space, so we don't tolerate any harassment of any kind. And so just know, like, you are forewarned. And if we find you engaging in any of that behavior, then we will have to remove you. So let us jump into the authors and what their books are about before we talk about the questions that I've come up with.
Hi, I'm Erica Waters. I am the author of Ghostwood Song, The River Has Teeth, and The Restless Dark, which is coming out in October. Ghostwood Song is about a girl named Shady, who her brother gets accused of murder, and she wants to prove that he didn't do it. And so she uses her family's ghost raising fiddle to raise the ghost of the person he's accused of killing in order to clear her brother's name. So it's a book about music and family and grief. So Ghostwood Song.
So, hi, I'm Rebecca Ross. I write fantasy books for teens and adults. Previously, I've written The Queen's Rising duology, Sisters of Sword and Song, Dreams Lie Beneath. And then this year, my adult debut of River Enchanted came out. So this is the UK cover. And River Enchanted is about a grumpy bard named Jack who is called home after being away from his clan for 10 years. And he thinks it's his laird who is summoning him home, and only to find out it's the laird's daughter, who Jack can't stand, but she needs him and his music to help her solve a terrible mystery as to why young girls are going missing on the Isle. So it's got a little bit of a mystery, a little bit of slow burning romance.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Tooley. I am the author of Sweet and Bitter Magic, and most recently, Sophie and the Bone Song, which is my contribution to music and magic. This book is about Sophie, who has trained her entire life to inherit her father's title as the only licensed lutenist in her kingdom. But on the day of auditions, she loses out to a girl who has never played the lute before. So she goes on the road to try to prove that she's using illegal magic to steal her title. And instead, she falls in love and learns some dark secrets about her family and herself.
So I think my first question, which is probably like the most obvious question ever, especially for this panel, is kind of what drew you to the idea of music and magic, and like specifically together, and what were some of your earliest memories of music?
So I guess I'll go first. So I kind of got the idea for putting music and magic together in kind of a funny way. So like I used to have my office up in the attic. And one day, anyone who's heard me talk about Ghostwood Song has already heard this story, so I apologize. But anyway, I heard banjo music from downstairs, and I was home alone. There was nobody here, and I was like, oh, so I like creep down the stairs, and the house is empty, banjo's hanging on the wall. And so I started thinking like, why would what would be the connection between like folk and bluegrass music and ghosts? Like what might a ghost want to communicate through music? And so I started thinking about those connections, and that's kind of where Ghostwood Song came from. And like the more I thought about music, I thought about how there's something sort of transcendent about music, the way it can take us out of ourselves, the way it can connect us to other people. Like if you've ever been to like a really fantastic concert and, everybody feels like one kind of organism together, you know what I mean? Like And so I don't know, I got kind of fascinated by this idea of music as kind of inherently magical. And so I started working on the idea of, ghosts who could communicate through music, which sort of in a roundabout way led to this main character, Shady, who plays the fiddle in order to raise ghosts.
Did you ever find out where the banjo music came from?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
My house is like a little bit haunted,
Oh, okay. Just like small, a small haunt.
Low-key haunted.
Oh my gosh. Just like Erica has her banjo in the background, I'm sitting right in front of a guitar and a keyboard. So music has been a huge part of my life forever. I had the parent regulated piano lessons turned into violin lessons. I think I played the flute for a minute. I kind of just hopped from instrument to instrument in high school. I got a guitar for Christmas and started writing some songs. And a couple of years after college, I moved to New York and started playing music in the city and started writing a little record, and a couple of EPs are out now. It's actually how I met my wife. She's a music producer and she made me a record, and that's how we met and fell in love. And so I think there's something 8 guitars in our house right now, 3 banjos, a ukulele, a couple basses. So it's just a huge theme in my life. And I have always wanted to write a book about music, but I didn't necessarily want to write a contemporary because that felt a little too close to home. And so I was looking for ways that I could bring that into the fantasy world that I love so much. And I just got this idea of every fantasy novel has your main character stopping in a tavern and they hear a song and then they hum it on the way to their adventures, but you never think about what's happening to the troubadour in the corner. And that's kind of how the first glimpse of Sophie came. And from there, I just I couldn't shake her. And I started this book 3 times trying to figure out where her story fit. But I couldn't give up on that initial image. So that's kind of where that came from.
So for me, I've always felt like music has vividly fed my imagination. And I remember being a preteen and a teen. I'm about to really date myself here, but I had a Walkman, which was a walking cassette player. And so I would open my little cassette case and put it in the Walkman and put my headphones in. And then gradually, I got the portable CD-ROM player that, you're going for a walk and you're literally carrying a disc around with your headphones in. But I really love listening to soundtracks. And so I'd go see a movie and I would pay very close attention to the music. And so then I would go buy the cassette or the CD afterwards and listen to it over and over and over again. And I feel soundtracks really do chart the emotional arc of a movie. And so I think it just kind of, music has always been somewhat of a storytelling vehicle for me. And even now, I listen to a lot of music when I write, a lot of soundtracks. Now I have Spotify, thankfully, so it's easy to kind of assemble all my playlists instead of getting, Walkman and stuff. But and I played the cello in high school. And I really loved it. It's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't keep going with it. So I'm maybe one day I just need to pick it back up. But yeah, I just honestly feel like what Erica was saying is music really does feel just like modern day magic. And so I think it just naturally just trickles into my storytelling.
Yeah, I was, after you said that with the soundtracks, I was going to ask, do you write with music? Do you all write when you're listening to music, or vice versa? I guess they go in tandem.
So I actually usually write to just silence. I get distracted really easily. Sometimes I will listen to a classical playlist, or occasionally I'll listen to whale sounds, whale songs, which are kind of soothing. But I generally can't listen to music, which is funny because so much of my writing is inspired by music and kind of revolves around music. But when I'm doing the actual writing, it's really hard for me to listen to music because I get kind of caught up in it and carried away from what I'm supposed to be doing.
I tend to pick 1 or 2 records that I just listen ad nauseum, like to death. So it almost becomes like background noise because I tune it out because I know it like so well. So my Spotify like unwraps at the end of the year. It's always like, you've listened to this record 700 times. And I was like, I know, I was drafting a book. Like, I'm sorry, I can't post this. It's so embarrassing. But every once in a while, like when I'm revising, that tends to be the time that I can be a little bit more like thoughtful about what I'm listening to. And then like, especially if there are particular scenes or like emotional beats that I'm trying to hit, sometimes there are songs that make me feel a certain way. And I'm like, this is what I want this scene to feel like. And so I like will listen to it and like the build or the lyric or the music or the swelling or whatever, just like over and over again until I feel like I've like captured that feeling in my words. I can't always say I'm successful, but like the 1 or 2 times that I've like nailed it, it's been the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. Basically everything Adrienne just said, like I'm very similar, I feel like, with my process where I will try to like build like a playlist, and I will like, there's always a few songs on that playlist like I will listen to over and over and over. And so yeah, my Spotify Wrapped at the end of the year, it's like kind of embarrassing. So it's like, this is the song 800 times, you know. But yeah, I definitely love, I think it can help, like Adrienne was saying, kind of pull out like the emotional beats of a story while you're writing it. So I definitely love listening to music while I write.
Yeah. It's funny, after I asked this, I was gonna say something kind of like what Erica's saying, where like I can't really listen to music and like focus on something. But then I also remembered that like when I was writing both of my 2 theses, I have like very specific songs that now whenever I hear them again, it like brings me back into that like pit of despair. And so and so it ends up being like either the entire orchestral Pride and Prejudice soundtrack or just like an hour-long looped like kill set playlist. But the next question I wanted to ask, going like off of that tandem, is how did you create or like work the music and the magic together in your worlds?
Yeah, so mine is it was really all about Shady. So like in the beginning, like Shady, like her dad has passed away, and he was the one who owned this fiddle that could raise ghosts, and he's gone now. And so she's always, and the fiddle's gone too. It's missing at the beginning of, I'm explaining this book terribly. The fiddle is missing at the beginning of the book because her dad was in a car accident and the fiddle was lost. And so in the beginning of the book, she just has like an ordinary fiddle. And, you know, so she like plays and plays and plays. And she just, it's not the same as when her dad played. You know, when her dad played, it was so powerful. And she's kind of longing for that sense of connection to him and that power. And so, you know, she starts hearing echoes of her own fiddle playing like in the woods. And so she starts to believe, okay, the fiddle is still out there somewhere. I can find it. And so like it becomes sort of this, the magic is all twined up with her family and her love for her dad and her grief for her dad. And so it's like music and grief and magic are also bound so tightly together that they're kind of inextricable. And so I kind of built all of them together, and they sort of build off of each other. And so I'm trying to see if I can think of a way to explain it without massively spoiling one of the plot points. But just to say that, yeah, basically like I used what I think is like the inherent sort of magical quality of music to connect us, and to tap into something deeper and beneath the surface. And I used that quality that I think already exists in our world, and I kind of just magnified it by 10, and sort of built it up into something even more powerful than it really is.
When I went about figuring out how magic and music were going to like be a part of it, I came up with like a couple different pieces of it, which like I think is visible when you read the book. You have like this like kind of surface layer of magic, which is like these papers that anyone can purchase and use magic as long as they, you know, pay a coin. They can, you know, make fire or, you know, find something they've lost. But I liked this idea of also having this world that sort of was gatekeeping art. And so, people started using papers to paint things, and they started using it to write poetry and like draw forth emotions that are falsified. And so music is sort of the last art in this world that you can't use a paper on. It's the last like untouched art. And so that's like a tenet that Sophie is like very serious about, which is why when Laura comes into this audition and she's very clearly using magic, Sophie is horrified that she would like ruin the sanctity of this thing she loves so much. But so that was kind of my starting level, was like I actually wanted to like separate the music from the magic. But of course, there are lots of other things in play. And just like Erica, there's some kind of spoilers related to some of the bigger magical pieces of this book. But let's just say that Laura is not the only person that has been secretly using magic in some of their art. And also, as Sophie kind of connects with her music in a way that is love-based rather than fear-based, throughout the book, she starts to find that the magic can kind of draw forth emotions and feelings and magic of her own. So kind of just like Erica, there's some grief in this book. There's mourning the loss of a father, but it sounds like Shady had a better relationship with her father than Sophie does. But those emotions in music, they just go hand in hand, and it's, like Erica said, really hard to separate those two things. And so there are lots of different elements of magic and music in play in Sophie.
So with The River Enchanted, and I don't know how y'all are, but sometimes I think when you're creating a story, you see like the character first and then the world builds, or you see the world building first and then the characters come. With all my other books, it was always characters. Like I would see a character very vividly in a situation. I have to be like, who are you? Where are you at? Like what's happening? With River Enchanted, it was very interesting because I saw like the setting first. It was like this very beautiful misty isle, very reminiscent to the Isle of Skye. And I saw that like gossip could be carried on the wind, and weavers could weave secrets into plaid shawls, and it would become like armor. And so I was intrigued, and I was like, well, who are the people who live here? And so I found Torn and Sidra first, and then I was like, I still feel like I'm missing somebody. And I'm writing everything down in my brainstorming journal, so it's like coming to me in the moment. And then I found Adara, and I still felt like I was missing someone. And then I finally found Jack, and I knew right away that he was a musician, and he had been sent away from the island when he was 10 to study music on the mainland. And so like from the beginning, it was just like very much tied up in his identity. And then I was like, well, what would bring him home? Like, why do they need him to come back to the clan? And so I was like just trying to answer these questions as I was going, but I was like, these girls are going missing on the island from the clan, and a bard's music is the only thing that is able to draw these spirits, which are like fairy creatures, to manifest. So they need him to come home to play for these spirits, so they can speak with the fairies and see, why are y'all stealing the girls? And of course, like I don't want to give like too much away either, because it's very much wrapped up in a mystery. But it was just interesting. It was just like he came to me pretty like, here I am. I'm a grumpy but heart of gold musician, and so I was like, all right.
By the way, if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat on your screen. I also wanted to know if there is like a fun fact about the world. It doesn't have to necessarily be musical related, but a fun fact of your world that you didn't include in the book. Maybe like was it an earlier draft or something like that?
I wouldn't say that it's a fun fact necessarily, but like, so you have like these favorite things in your books, and then your editor comes through and they're like, all right, we got to tighten this up. So unfortunately, like one of the things that really got tightened up in my book was this character Orlando, who is my favorite character. And he's a guitarist, and he's a member of Shady's bluegrass band. And so, he was always using like whatever songs they were playing. Like he would always like make these amazing punny jokes out of them. And like they all got cut, which is, maybe for the best. My editor knows what she's doing, but I really miss those little punny jokes.
I love that. And we hate when editors are right always. Like we're like, we always know you're right, but it like hurts a little bit inside too. This is like halfway answering your question, like not really, like maybe 10% answering your question. But I will say that like the journey of writing Sophie was like a very long one, but in a very short time frame. Like the book, like the first draft that I turned into my editor and the book that got published maybe have like 3 lines in them that are the same. My first round of revisions, I did like a full like blank page rewrite in like a month. And I like just had needed it because like it hurts you when your editor is right, but your editor is usually always right. And she was just like, you know, we need to like pump up this and pump up that. And I realized it was like in the back of my brain, but it was not on the page. And so I just kind of had to sit down and be like, all right, what is this that I'm trying to do? So not really the same thing, but the first draft of Sophie and the published book of Sophie, not the same thing. So basically the entire book was cut.
So I'm kind of similar with Erica in the fact that I like ended up cutting 3 entire characters like from like the book. So originally I thought I was writing a YA novel, and then it kind of became 50-50 between YA and adult. So I decided like, what do I do with this? So I ended up kind of elevating it to adult, and which is nice because I finally like I could have a little more word count, because with all my YA fantasies I would have to cut like 100 pages from them. But it's funny, like I rewrote this book so many times and would add characters in, like side characters in, and my editor would be like, no, let's like cut them out. So these are like constantly going up and down, like, you know, rewriting this, rewriting that. But it's funny for me to think back, like, oh yeah, there were 3 entire characters that people will never know about that once were part of the story that got cut.
Yeah, Ghostwood Song had a beagle named Chipmunk in it. I really mourn Chipmunk's cutting.
That's the best name.
I know.
By the way.
The trouble was I kept losing track of the dog in the action, you know, so it'd be like 50 pages have gone by, like, where's Chipmunk?
That's fair. That's fair.
I want to ask a question about Sophie and Ghostwood Song, because both, you kind of talked a little bit about it before, the tackling the loss of a father, but also like complexity of family in general. I know that there's like varying levels of unresolvedness, I guess, in these like familial relationships. So I wanted to know, how do you explore the difficulty and complexity of loss and grief, and coming to terms with like how we see our own families in your books? It's a pretty big, deep question.
That is a big, deep question. So like, I think for me, my dad died not that long before I wrote Ghostwood Song, like a few years before. And, you know, I'd never, you know how there's these like stages of grief that you go through. You know, I got stuck in anger, and I never really left anger for years. I was just always pissed that he had died, because he died pretty young in his 60s, and it just seemed so unnecessary. And so like, I partly wrote Ghostwood Song as a way to sort of deal with those feelings. And it was interesting to look at grief from all these different angles, and the way that different family members experience grief differently. You know, like in real life, like my sister was a lot closer to my dad, and so, you know, he was this major loss from her life, you know, and for me, it was a really different kind of relationship. And so I really wrote that into Ghostwood Song quite a lot. Like, Shady was deeply close to her father, who had passed, and so much of her identity was wrapped up in who he was and her relationship to him. But for her older brother, Jesse, it was a totally different relationship. And he felt completely different about their dad and what they had lost. And so it was, I mean, any family relationship, you can look back at, like, I don't know, like a vacation you took when you were 10 and your sister was 15. And the way you remember it is totally different. You may even have completely like contradictory memories of the same events. And I'm kind of fascinated by that, and the way that works into like our relationships with people, and how we remember them differently. We see them totally differently. And so that was one of the concepts I kind of played with a lot in Ghostwood Song, was, you know, Shady's dad was this hero to her, but to other people, he was something very, very different. And a lot of the book is her kind of coming to terms with that fact that her dad wasn't exactly who she thought he was. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of what I was trying to get at.
That's huge. I think that's such an interesting way to look at like a person. I think especially when we're writing from like one character's perspective, like this is the world through their eyes, and that's like such a huge thing to take on. And like I really commend that as part of your storyline. With Sophie, it's sort of similar, but also like very different. With Sophie, her father is less her father and more of her teacher. He has spent her entire life priming her to take over his title. And his kind of main tenet surrounding music is that good art is only created by those who suffer for it. So it is only after her father's death that Sophie starts to untangle that statement, and with the help of Lara realize that that's actually not healthy or correct, and that's actually really abusive. And so her journey with grief is less the loss of her father and more the ability to find herself amidst these like tenets that he gives her. Like each one of the days of the week is for some form of suffering, and through her doing that, that is how she grows closer to the muse, and how she is able to create her art. The ability to play the lute, to compose the songs, is because of these things that she's putting herself through at the hands of her father. And so her grief is sort of actually stages of unlearning. And it's hard to, just like Erica is saying, you have this idea of who someone is and what they mean to you and what their level of authority is. And so like kind of unraveling all of that for Sophie probably wouldn't have been possible without her father's death. And so she's grappling with sort of like this freedom, but also knowing that like, you know, she's now an orphan. And so she's going through a lot. But I think that it was really important to me in the writing of this book to really deconstruct that whole suffering artist trope. And I thought that her father, even though he ended up being a pretty nasty dude, was kind of the way to really kind of bring that home for like a teenage audience.
Yeah, I love that idea of like part of processing your own grief is like processing how you felt about someone and like the good and the bad, you know, and like not putting them on the pedestal, and sort of being able to be very sort of practical with like how you see that person's influence on your life and sort of your own, I guess, like personal biases, I guess. I want to chat if we're in A River Enchanted, there's kind of some pretty large levels of stakes. You know, there's like personal stakes and sort of family and community stakes. It's kind of multi-level stakes. And so I wanted to know, how do you balance the creation of a character in relation to the level of the stakes? I don't know actually, as I'm saying that, if that question like makes any sense, but basically like how you manage to develop a character in relation to like what they're going through, I guess, and the pacing of the story.
Yeah, so when Jack is called home to play for the clan, he hasn't spoken to his mom in like they've been writing letters, but he and his mom are estranged from each other. And so he definitely feels more like he is more of a mainlander now than part of the clan on the island. But when he gets there, and of course he learns that, yeah, these 3 girls have vanished without a trace. We don't know where they're at. We're just going to assume the spirits have ushered them away. We need you to play your songs so we can figure out where they are and ask the spirits to return them. And so Jack's like, all right, I'll do this. And then I'm heading back home to the Isle, to the mainland as soon as possible. But things change really quickly for him when he realizes he has an 8-year-old sister that he never knew about. So all of a sudden he has a sister in a land where girls her age are vanishing. And so of course, like that has like a lot of tangled emotions for him to kind of sort through, that his mom never told him while he was away at school that she had another child. But of course now he's like, I can't leave until I know my sister is going to be safe, which means he needs to delay his departure. And so I think just like immediately kind of using the personal stake first and just beginning to weave it into like the larger stakes and how that plays out with the community, especially as the mystery begins to unravel and the truth is coming to light. There's some dark secrets on the Isle. And I also, so pacing can be very hard for me because I'll just like keep writing all day, like all page after page. It's like, oh my gosh. But I had to, kind of look at it as, okay, what is this story structured as? And so I use this like a 3-act structure. So at the end of each part, we have like another revelation of the mystery. And so it just continues to build and build and build. So it's almost like, I imagine like a reader feels like you're kind of walking up a staircase where things are getting higher and more intense as more things are coming to light about the Isle and the mystery. But it's interesting, like with the sequel, with The Fire Endless, I used like a 4-act structure. So I think you could use any type of like structure, whatever you think like would work best with the story. But that kind of at least helped me like see like where my storytelling beats were hitting. And also I think just, bringing the stakes up a little higher each time. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, there's also like in A River Enchanted, there's also a bunch of lots of secrets, but also like a bunch of very interesting family dynamics, as you're kind of pointing out as well. I wanted to do another reminder to drop any questions in the chat for these authors. Another question that I had is, I don't know if this is like something we've already talked a little bit about or also too spoilery, but also to talk about your main character's relationship to music, or if that's like too spoilery or we've talked about it already. What about a side character's relationship to music?
Yeah, I think I've kind of already covered this a little bit, talking about Shady. Like in the beginning of the novel, like she associates music so much with death, I think, because like her dad did use his fiddle to raise ghosts. And so like she sees, I think, music at least partly as a way to commune with the dead. But one thing I love for her, I wrote it this way. I love it. Ooh, okay. One thing that like I really try to do for her is that she has, so during the book, she forms a bluegrass band. And so she starts, I think, having a little bit of a different relationship to music through this band, where it's not just about her family, her heritage, this fiddle ghost. It's also, like music is this incredible way to connect to the living, right? To like have this thing that we share together, and to find something beautiful together when we play. And so I think giving Shady this bluegrass band and 2 love interests in it brought a little bit of levity to the book and a little bit of kind of life and goodness in the midst of all of the kind of loss and death and grief.
I talked about this a little bit already, but Sophie's relationship with music is a little bit charged. She sees it specifically as something to perfect, something to sacrifice herself for. And when Lara comes into the picture and, wins this title through this audition, she really brings a completely new perspective to Sophie's life, in that you can find joy in creating music, and you can love the songs that you sing and the words that you write, and you can, infuse those positive feelings into your work, and it doesn't make your art suffer. In fact, it makes it better. It gives performances that people can connect to because you're sharing your words with an audience versus just like singing them at them. And so Sophie goes through this kind of learning experience, and at first she starts out like fully resenting this. It goes against everything she's ever known and thought and believed about herself. And, she's technically very good. But Lara has heart. And so she's watching her perform and she's realizing that like, oh, maybe there's a way for this to be both. It doesn't have to be an either or, it can be an and. And so her relationship with music really does change throughout the book, for the better, for the less sacrificial and more joyful. And so by the end, she's even able to share the stage with someone, which is big for her.
So I'll just say with Jack and River Enchanted, so a little bit of just his backstory is that he was chosen when he was 10 to go. They sent him away to go study music in the mainland. So he really resented it to be sent away, and he felt he also doesn't know who his dad is. His mom has never told him who his dad is, so he resents his mom for that. So he's like this 10-year-old, and he's just like very angry and doesn't want to be there and doesn't care about music or instruments. But a few years pass, and he finally has a professor that sets a harp in his hands and begins to teach him how to play the harp. And that's when like things click together for him, and like the storm that he feels within him like begins to just ease whenever he's playing this instrument. So it very much becomes a part of his identity and his first love. And so it's very surprising for him when he does return to the Isle. Everyone has kind of looked at him as being, you know, Mirren's bastard. Nobody knows who his dad is. Like, oh gosh, here he is. But here he comes, he returns, and he, you know, he has this harp with him. And so it's just like very different homecoming than he expected. But I do think it's just a lot of ways like it is something that he really loves. And of course, in the beginning, he's a little bit stingy and like as far as sharing his music, because he's this very grouchy character. But I think he kind of realizes too what it means to share it. And also when he sings for the first time and the spirits do manifest, like they hear him and they answer him. It's just like a very powerful transformative moment for him where he begins to realize like I do belong here. Whereas before I never felt like I did.
Speaking of instruments, like musical instruments, I wanted to know that if your characters had to use a different musical instrument, what would it be?
Sophie would never play the flute. I'm just going to put that out there right away. She would never do it. I think that if she couldn't play the lute, I think that she would still want to play something that required like a lot of dexterity and like complexity to play. So in the book, there are like only a handful of instruments that people can play. So she would not want to play the flute. She would not want to do percussion. I think she actually would probably try like her hand at the accordion. So you have like the multitasking of the like keyboard and also like using the bellows and then singing on top of that. I think like she would require being able to show off at every avenue. So that would be her requirement.
It's funny because I was going to say the flute. So Jack would probably pick the flute just because I think it just gives me a little bit of some Celtic vibes, like to have the flute involved. So
I think Shady would probably play the banjo if she couldn't play the fiddle, just because it's such an important bluegrass instrument, and she's pretty much all about that bluegrass.
What's an instrument that you can't play at all and would want to learn from, like, new?
So as soon as Rebecca said she played the cello, I literally was like, I love the cello. I think it's one of those beautiful instruments. It just like every like piece for cello just like sends me to space. That's what I would pick, like hands down.
I would also want to play the cello. There's just something about it. It's kind of sexy. Like,
yes.
It's just,
I
don't know. There's something about it. I also would really like to play the banjo, which I was started learning to play and then given up, and then started learning to play and then given up. It is a very difficult instrument to play. And I am blessed with neither rhythm nor a sense of key nothing. I can't carry a tune in a bucket. I can't even clap in rhythm. So, I should leave music to other people, but it's just like you have that kind of envy of other artistic mediums, like I would desperately love to be able to dance. I would love to be able to sing. I would love to be able to play an instrument or paint. I can't do any of those things. I have one talent and that's all I got. Forever disappointed.
I think I would have to say the banjo too. I think that would be so much fun to be able to play. But I do wish I could sing because I can't sing either, Erica. And it's like, oh my gosh, sometimes I just hear people sing and it's like so effortless and beautiful. I'm like, man, why couldn't I have gotten a little bit of that talent? But
Yeah, I feel like I was gonna say the cello too, but now I feel like it's the it's the fan favorite answer. So now I feel like I have to like come up with something else. I wanted to know, speaking about music, I mean, we've been speaking about music this whole time, but what were your favorite books about music, or also just like magic in general? Just because I don't know, musical magic books aren't necessarily as sort of there aren't as many as maybe there are just like other books and magical books in general. So I musical magic and or magic in general.
So I'm gonna cheat a little bit. So you guys know The Magicians by Lev Grossman, that series which came out several years ago. So I liked the books. I love the TV show, like obsessively love The Magicians. And so there are several episodes that involve music. I don't remember this being in the book in any way, so I think it's completely an invention of the TV show. But there's this episode where these group of magicians are trying to kind of save their friend from this like partying spell, and they all sing Under Pressure together, even though they're like all in these different locations, and like that's how they break the spell. And I just am obsessed with it. And there are all of these random episodes where they just like burst into like 80s power ballads. I don't know why, but it's like one of my favorite things about the show. So if you haven't watched The Magicians, 10 out of 10 would recommend.
Amazing. Have not. Will add to my list. I'm gonna also cheat because Julia Ember is not here, but I loved the way that she used music in Ruin Song. It was one of the first books that I read that I was like, oh, this is a comp for this book that's living in my head. I don't know, like, I didn't know where it fit. And then I read Ruin Song and I was like, this is fantastic. I love the way that she like plays with like the voice as magic and like as like a vehicle for like bad magic too. And then a book that I haven't read yet, but that I know is on my TBR on my shelf behind me, is Bethany Morrow's A Song Below Water, which I know is about like sirens and is supposed to be absolutely extraordinary. And As Soon as I'm Off Deadline is at the top of my list.
So I am going to recommend, this is a musical magical book series called The Books of Pelennor by Alison Croghan. These books published like I feel like before the YA trend really like was booming. So they're a little bit older, but I think they're absolutely beautiful, and they are about bards and how bards cast their magic. And it honestly reminds me a little bit of like the Alison Croghan style is kind of like Lord of the Rings, where it's just like very rich and beautiful. And she writes these beautiful songs that are part of her novels. Or 4 books too. So like, it's like a nice, wonderful long series. And of course, the protagonist is a young girl named Mayred who discovers she is a bard and she has this magic. And so I would consider these books like pretty big influences of mine because I read them when I was a teen. And I don't really have time to reread very many books just because of like the schedule and, trying to keep up with new releases. But these are like 4 books that I like always like want to revisit just because they're so beautifully told.
Yeah, when I was listening, I feel like when I was listening to the Lord of the Rings audiobooks, I knew that there were songs, but I was surprised about how much care the audiobook narrators went to and like actually singing them. I thought it would just be kind of like, them doing a little bit of music, but this was like them actually singing. Okay, they weren't like accompaniment, but vocally singing. I wanted to ask if you had a song or an album maybe that you really relate your book to. It doesn't have to be necessarily one that you were listening to while you were drafting or were listening to while revising, but it can be, but also kind of like it doesn't have to be, I guess, is my question.
So Shady Grove, which is an Appalachian folk ballad that has been done a billion times by a billion different people. My very favorite iteration of it is by Duck Watson. And so Shady's actually named after this song, Shady Grove. And the first time I heard it on vinyl, like not just like tinny coming through phone speakers. Like it was life changing. I don't even know how to explain it to you. Like I put on Doc Watson's Shady Grove, and it was just like blew me out of the water. And so I really can't think about this book without thinking about that song and thinking about Doc Watson. Yeah, I don't like. There's so many versions of the song and so many that I really like, but I feel like his captures like this simultaneous sort of eeriness and sweetness of the book in a way that like none of the other versions of the song do. So yeah, go listen to Shady Grove by Doc Watson.
For me, this is a hard one because I listened to just a bunch of like I said, like the same record over and over again, but I don't know that it's really like what I think of when I think of Sophie. I would say like the narrative structure / like songwriting care, I would probably say would be the album Once I Was an Eagle by Laura Marling, who's one of my favorite singer-songwriters of all time, incredibly prolific. I listened to her song The Muse over and over and over again as I was writing this book, but it's actually the Once I Was an Eagle record that I think is like probably the closest aligned to like Sophie's journey and all of her like thoughts and feelings and confusion and anger and things of that nature.
Yeah, I kind of had a hard time answering this too because I feel like I pulled a lot of different types of music into this playlist, but this is going to probably seem like I'm super cheating. But I really love Bear McCreary's Outlander soundtrack, and so I feel like with each book that I'm writing, like each playlist has like somewhat of a different sound. And so I really like loved, and of course, like you can't listen to that playlist or that album without thinking of Scotland. So it just like immediately would like take me there. And so yeah, I have to say that whole album, particularly season 1.
Yeah, as you say that, like the song just immediately starts playing in my head. It is just it's such a good, like vibey, atmospheric kind of, also catchy. Like you just hum it for the rest of the day on repeat. Didi, I wanted to know, as like a fun question, if you had any other title ideas for the book. Like maybe they were titles before it became the title it is now.
I only had bad titles. So like my original working title was Scrub Pine Kingdom. And then the second title that I was using was Shady Grove, My Little Love, which, and getting to the title Ghostwood Song was a process of just making list after list after list of potential titles and bouncing them back and forth with my agent. And I think she was the one who finally came up with Ghostwood Song. Bless her. Thank you, Lauren.
This was always the title. This was like 100% from day one. The entire book changed, but the title was always the same. So do with that what you will. And yeah, it was one of those things that I was like, please don't change this, publishing team. Please don't change this, because I like thought it was so perfect. And thankfully I got to keep it. So very grateful.
So my working title was Downstream, and I have always wanted to have a one-word title, and they will not give it to me, but they're just like, I think we could do this book, is magical. We need something more magical. It's like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I understand that. So then it actually was A River Enchanted, and then we switched it to Sing Up the River. And then my UK team was like, hey, we like A River Enchanted a lot better. We think they'll do better for our market. Do you mind switching back your titles? Like, okay, fine. We'll switch back to River Enchanted, which I'm glad it switched back, because I think it does overall fit the story better. But so yeah, it was kind of, I feel like my titles never stick. I always end up having to change them. That's okay.
And then I also wanted to know if you would write another book or series with Music Magic. I know that, Rebecca, your sequel obviously will also have, I assume, Music Magic. So, but like past that sequel, I guess.
I definitely think so. I mean, I honestly, I didn't even talk about this, but my one of my young adult standalones, Sisters of Sword and Song, also deals with magic being musical. So it just seems like a theme that I always seem to come back to. So I'm sure I might have to put a little space between The River Enchanted and whatever, just so it's not like, oh, she's always drawing music and magic together. But I'm sure I will, because I enjoy writing it so much.
So far, I have used some version of music magic in every single book that I've written, except for the one that's coming out in October, The Restless Dark. So like even my unpublished ones that will never see the light of day have all had some little kernel of music magic in them, which is kind of weird. But my second book, The River Has Teeth, so like the mom in that book is a river siren, which she gets sort of transformed into through a spell gone wrong. And she can't speak, she can only communicate through song. And so she sings these like Appalachian ballads. And a lot of the book, it's music isn't as big in that book as it is in Ghostwood Song, but it is like a huge part of The River Has Teeth is these kind of Appalachian ballads and the story. I kind of wanted it to feel like, are you familiar with murder ballads? So like murder ballads it's like a type of Appalachian ballad that is basically like a narrative of someone's murder. They're really, really popular in Appalachian music. So like I wanted the book to kind of feel like that, but with a really different ending. So I think I'll always kind of be writing some little kernel of music into almost everything that I write. Like even the book I'm working on right now, which is a YA dark academia, has a little kernel of music magic in it. So I don't know why, I'm just really drawn to that as a concept, I guess.
So far, I feel like all of my books have been pretty different in terms of like theme and magic systems, etc. But I definitely have some ideas brewing in the back of my brain. So I would not be surprised if this was not the only musical piece in my collection. Fingers crossed.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. I'm very excited for all the music magic and all of, well, I mean any of the future books, but like specifically music magic books. And thank you everyone for joining and chatting with us as well. The giveaway link is in the chat, but I will put it in the description box as well for anyone who is watching this in the future that we are communicating right now. And I'd love to thank the authors for joining me. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your waking hours, whatever that is for you in whatever time zone that is. And I would thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lily.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.